Fight Night is undoubtedly the most successful boxing game franchise to date. In order to appreciate the milestones set by the Fight Night franchise, we have to take a retrospective look at the games that laid the foundation for the series. Let's talk about the history of Fight Night. EA published 2 titles in the year of 1995, one of which, developed by High Score Productions and Visual Concepts, made its way to the Sega Genesis and 32X, called Tough Man Contest. The game features Butterbean in what most would call a Super Punch-Out clone, and it's exactly that. Learning patterns will yield the best results as you mix punches with well-timed dodges. The gameplay isn't as forgiving as Super Punch-Out, but it does show the true nature of EA's competitiveness with the ability to choose your movesets, start 2 to 8 player tournaments, and enter the Tough Man mode. Some reviewers at the time preferred its challenging gameplay over Super Punch-Out and enjoyed the more mature feel to the game. It's a matter of combos and patience, and EA clearly set the tone early for their sports games. Developed by Grey Matter and published by EA Sports in the same year exclusively for the 3DO, Foes of Ali was one of the pioneers to bring the canvas to the 3D era of gaming. You play as Muhammad Ali as you relive historic fights throughout his career in either exhibition, tournament, or career mode against 9 of Ali's actual opponents such as Joe Frazier, Henry Cooper, Sonny Liston, and Leon Spinks. Gameplay features were surprisingly abundant for such an arcade game at the time. They went as far as to incorporate audio clips of the historical info of the match, and also a recap of each boxer's stats at the time of the bout. Before each match, you could choose difficulty, verbal feedback, and even set the blood to gallons, having a bloodbath. During the match, you could choose between 21 camera angles, with some distinct ones being first-person mode, blimp view, and a judge's view. Small details can be seen such as sweat flying off of boxers as punches land, blood soaking their trunks, and the AI becoming more reserved when in danger of a knockout. The crowd dynamically became louder as you were on the brink of a KO. Each boxer had an ability to bob and weave using leaning to evade punches and blocking either the side or front. Tournaments could be set up of 8 boxers and shuffled to randomize the order in which you fight, and boxers could be selected multiple times. Either pit the AI against each other or try your shot at surviving the bracket. Career mode sets you on a journey through Ali's fights from the 60s and 70s. It's more of the same, but just dedicated to his real-life bouts. The game is a relic, and the developers genuinely delivered a respectable vision. But the gameplay is not one to be revisited. That doesn't take away from the overall aesthetic and accomplishment from a game on such niche hardware. It wouldn't be until 3 years later that EA would partner with Press Start to develop Knockout Kings in 1998 for the PlayStation and Game Boy Color. With the power of the PlayStation, many games like training could be selected before each match in career mode using the speed bag or heavy bag to increase your speed or power. Although it was simulated, the detail and the sounds and animation complement the immersion. The presentation was slightly overhauled before and during matches. Your current rank, punching stats, and best punch were displayed before the start of a bout. The tail of the tape pre-fight and round stats were sponsored by Ring Magazine. Players had a current health, max health, and stamina bar that would deplete depending on exertion. A ring card girl was introduced along with current round stats. The gameplay is improved upon from Foes of Ali, adding the ability to backstep, block high and low, bob and weave, clinch, throw power and penalty shots, and switch stances. If knocked down, which unfortunately was how I spent more of my time playing Knockout Kings during the making of this video, button mashing would replenish your health. Create a Boxer made its debut into the series, allowing you to create a lightweight, middleweight, or heavyweight. The customization for a PS1 game is surprisingly packed with content without having to unlock anything. Choosing your style, height, weight, hairstyle, facial hair, skin color, trunk design, glove color, shoe color, the amount of choices are immense. Although the roster boasted around 38 pro boxers with notable names such as Oscar De La Hoya, Marvin Hagler, Butterbean, Floyd Mayweather, Rocky Marciano, Lennox Lewis, and Ali, just to name a few, the critical reception was subpar due to the controls leaving much to be desired, and the game lacking any real fluidity. The following year, EA and Black Ops Entertainment brought Knockout Kings 2000 to the PlayStation and Nintendo 64 in November of 1999. With the added Classics Fight mode, boxing enthusiasts could enjoy reliving fights from the past, each accompanied with a brief recap of the historical bouts. Career mode returned with added details and features like choosing your gym, taunt, and ring walk style. Training consisted of 10 simulated exercises from jump roping to jogging, each of which granted different skill points. Entrances complemented the immersion with players walking pompously from the tunnel to the ring, while their hype music played in the background as they made it to their respective corners. Presentation outpaced the original by a country mile, from sound quality to likeness of the boxers. Keys to victory showcased the strategy each fighter would utilize to outbox their opponent. Boxers could throw basic punches, which could be altered using the triggers to unleash various preset combos. Player stats between rounds were substituted for judge scores. EA made it a point to hit every beat in making Knockout Kings 2000 a proper sequel to their new franchise, even adding details like boxer biographies, crowd response that matched the pace of the fight, and gameplay that renders the predecessor obsolete. Knockout Kings 2000 would go on to win Console Sports Game of the Year over NFL 2K and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Continuing their reign after their recent critical success, EA and Black Ops developed Knockout Kings 2001 exclusively for the PlayStation 1 and 2. The PS1 version released alongside the PS2 in October of 2000, and a couple of months later, the PS2 version will release in February. This time around, EA crossed their T's and dotted their I's from the roster, including a brand new women's division, adding the ability to recruit a trainer and cut man, and having Teddy Atlas as a commentator. Gameplay focused more on technical skills rather than the previous game's button mashing and overuse of the auto combo ability. Gone were the button mashing strategies, or lack thereof, and in place was the new dynamic punch control, featuring an arsenal of basic and lunging punches. One of the more unique features added was fighting in the clinch, from throwing blows to the body and head to throwing illegal blows to open up wounds and gash your opponent. Fantasy matchups made its debut to the usual modes, pitting boxers that never had the chance to fight against each other, or boxers who the world wanted to see fight head-to-head. Boxer likeness saw a dramatic overhaul to the point that you can tell who's who without having a name on screen. In retrospect, Knockout Kings 2000 may have been the true foundation that realized the potential for the franchise in the years to come. Their follow-up, Knockout Kings 2002, would ditch the PS1 era and move on to the next generation of gaming on both PlayStation 2 and Xbox. With names like Felix Trinidad, Evander Holyfield, Vladimir Klitschko, and Bernard Hopkins, you knew EA found the rhythm. Although introducing a new game engine, the next generational leap did come with its caveats. Some features were missing, such as the ring entrances, slugfests, fantasy matchups, women's boxers, boxer biographies, and boxing stats between rounds. Nonetheless, the upgrade in the graphics department was on full display. The boxers do have this weird action figure look, but it isn't a deal breaker. The gameplay is more focused on a stick and move style, and the AI will teach you that early on. Career mode attempted to add more depth to the game with cutscenes before and after fights of your manager talking to you about the upcoming bout.
Okay, kid, I'm gonna be your new manager. If you do what I say, I promise you'll go right to the top. If you don't, you'll be back working security at the mall.
Tournament mode made a return as well, but it's incredible that Knockout Kings 2002 even had a first-person mode. EA made it a point to outdo the competition in the early days of EA Big and before they monopolized sports games. But Knockout Kings seemed to be evolving into a different breed. But critical reception didn't stray too far from 2001. Even then, EA finally molded their boxing game into a proven competitor. Knockout Kings 2003, however, saw an exclusive launch in 2003 on the GameCube, where the name Knockout Kings would retire. Enter Fight Night 2004. Developed by EA Canada and released on April 5, 2004, EA would rebrand the name Knockout Kings to Fight Night. According to executive producer Kudo Sonoda, they were trying to signify the overall quantum shift in quality of the game. The cover art features Roy Jones Jr. following his WBA heavyweight title win in 2003, with the game's announcer being one of hip-hop's cultural icons, Big Tigga. Released on PS2 and Xbox, Fight Night 2004 featured an innovative way to box called Total Punch Control. Players could now use the analog to draw punches, block, or parry opponents as they bob and weave around the canvas. This new control scheme mimicked the angle of your desired punch, connecting the fist with the analog to intertwine the player with the boxer. Leaning and ducking were paramount to success in the ring, along with stamina management and evasion. Knockouts were now completely physics-based, ditching the repetitive animations from previous titles to allow for more brutal and spontaneous KOs. The executive producer described the goal of Total Punch Control as a means to bring an ebb and flow to the game to avoid button mashing. The repetitive nature of previous titles were heavily scrutinized, and this new mechanic would introduce a deep learning curve in skill-based fighting. Along with updated controls and visuals were a barrage of in-game features such as entrances that featured music, effects such as lasers, doves, and fireworks, and customizable gear that could be purchased and unlocked by playing the career mode. This time around, the roster features 32 licensed boxers among 6 different weight classes that allowed you to move between divisions to earn multiple titles. During your rise to the ranks, you could train between fights to increase your skill points and choose which fights you wanted based on payout or your opponent rank. Fighting higher ranked opponents reap better rewards at the risk of fighting a more experienced fighter. EA borrowed the knockout playback from Knockout Kings, adding a highlight reel vibe to every KO. If you were one of the unlucky ones to witness the taste of the canvas, you were met with a recovery minigame where you had to line up 2 pictures of the ref using both analogs to center the photos. As you became more exhausted, the pictures would move slower each time. The movement and velocity of boxing is still unmatched to this day. Animations are accurate and impressive even by today's standards. Each punch visually impacts the body and head, cuts leak blood and splatter when hit, swelling closes the eye if you leave your guard unchecked. Leaning against the ropes would showcase their elasticity. Fight Night 2004 is a gritty yet genuine replication of the sport of boxing. The game went on to sell over 1 million units worldwide by June 2004, but despite critical praise, was a runner-up to win the Best Traditional Sports Game award that was granted to ESPN NFL 2K5. EA had nearly perfected the formula for boxing games, and they responded with a follow-up the next year. Outdoing a sequel is no easy feat. Innovation drove the industry in the days of the PS2 and Xbox, so EA's reputation was on the line to deliver a sequel worthy enough to step in the ring with 2004, brilliantly named Fight Night Round 2, developed by EA Chicago, a name that would become iconic in the series, and released in February of 2005. A new mechanic integrated into the Total Punch Control was added, the Haymaker, a wind-up punch that packed more power, with the ability to instantly knock down opponents became the main staple of Round 2. This did, however, lead to Haymakers becoming the subject of spamming, but a perfectly timed parry would leave your opponents vulnerable to a counter. Along with the added Haymaker, Cut Man minigames were featured as well. Strategy became a priority in the more brutal bouts to determine whether or not to mend to your bruises or reduce the bleeding of your cuts to avoid a fight stoppage. Round 2 is widely known for its unique Create a Boxer mode, intuitively using the analogs to adjust a player's body type, facial structure, and choose between different styles of fighting. Training modes returned as well, but with the ability to focus train, quick train, or skip it entirely. Depending on the difficulty of your training, you could leave with injuries or be granted a significant boost in relevant stats. Continuing with the theme of outdoing the original, the roster included names like Bernard Hopkins, Floyd Mayweather, Roberto Duran, Muhammad Ali, Manny Pacquiao, Ricky Hatton, Miguel Cotto, Shane Mosley, Arturo Gatti, Rocky Marciano, and Roy Jones Jr., just to name a few. The GameCube version also included the SNES game Super Punch-Out and Little Mac as a playable character if you completed every circuit or created a boxer with the first name Mac-Man. Round 2 cemented the franchise as the top competitor of boxing video games, and they would continue their stride into the next generation of HD gaming. EA Chicago stepped foot in the ring, wielding the power of the Xbox 360 in the palm of its hands. Launching on the PSP, PlayStation 2, Xbox, and the Xbox 360, Fight Night Round 3 made its debut in February of 2006. The most obvious deviation from Round 2 is better seen in the 360 and PS3 version, which were released in December later that year. The aesthetic of Round 3 emulated the glory days of titans clashing in the ring as time becomes the very essence on which they dance upon. Lighting felt heavenly, damage models showed skin ripping and muscle bending to the glove's will as punches impressed upon your opponent's face and body. Technical gameplay was the name of the game. Carefully placing your blows methodically while you utilized the new punching mechanics to your advantage. Impact punches gave you the ability to throw flash KOs to put them in a daze. Stun punches to force opponents to desperately defend themselves. Haymakers were tempered to avoid overuse and become more of a tool of strategy. The PS3 version had an exclusive first-person mode called Get in the Ring that put you face-to-face with your adversary. Blocking obscured your view, taking damage affected your boxer's ability to hear, and your eyesight would dwindle if you were subject to too much pain and punishment. Round 3 accomplished the goal of creating an immersive boxing game with textbook fighting mechanics at the cost of reduced punching speed, making Round 3 the more technically sound fight night out of the series. The generational leap between 2 and 3 is staggering to say the least. Creative boxers saw a massive overhaul with more refined sculpting, haircuts, gear, and styles than Round 2. A creative boxer felt more like an extension of yourself if done properly. Every fight bared the resemblance to a movie. Beads of sweat trickled down an exhausted foe. Battered and bruised boxers winced at incoming blows. Invisible fatigue could be easily identified with the updated animations. The improvements were everlasting. Flexing their newly acquired 15-year deal for exclusive rights to ESPN sports simulation games, players could try their chance at getting sponsored in career mode to be featured on ESPN. Along with ESPN being featured, EA also managed to advertise for brands like Burger King and Dodge. Ironically, intrusive in-game advertisements are deeply rooted in EA's development culture. Despite that, Fight Night Round 3 went on to be reviewed well enough to receive the first ever BAFTA for sports video game in 2006, and IGN also awarded it Best Offline Multiplayer on PS3. Without a doubt, Round 3's graphics were breathtaking, and the carefully crafted gameplay beautifully captured the art of the sport. However, the sequel would need to distance itself from the old tech of the PS2 and Xbox. A fresh coat of paint could only go so far in the age of HD gaming. The reign of terror was in full effect for EA, and they had a foolproof plan to maintain their legendary status. If you're old enough to remember the release of Fight Night Round 4, EA tied the game's release to the world of boxing with a demo of the upcoming fight between Manny Pacquiao and Ricky Hatton. Developed by EA Canada, the game will release on PS3 and 360 in June 2009 with the game's box art featuring two of boxing's most well-known names, Muhammad Ali and Mike Tyson. Round 4 introduced a new gameplay engine that elevated the feel of boxing to another degree. Fighting was now physics-based, lending to punches grazing the face, penetrating the block, and slipping off the shoulders. A clean punch made all the difference. AI adapted to your style using real AI. Record, evaluate, adapt, and learn, incentivizing players to adjust their strategy on the fly. Styles were more impactful. Tyson ferociously battered opponents. Ali kept his distance with jabs and straights. Pacquiao let off combos without mercy. Gameplay was king, and styles determined your player's strengths and weaknesses. Fights became intimately dangerous as gaps were closed and distance was created. A blocking meter was added to the HUD along with the usual stamina and health, all of which could be replenished based on performance during the match. The Cutman minigame was modified into a point system that let you choose the increment of healing you wanted to apply. This created a dynamic where your strategy would naturally change if your opponent began to outbox you, lending to a more immersive match. Trunks turned pink and red from the mixture of sweat and blood, and swollen eyes oozed from the relentless punishment. The knockdown mechanic was simplified to balancing a meter to the center using the analog and pressing up once it's centered. Haymakers were back, but paired with a lethal counter mechanic that allowed for a perfectly timed counter window to temporarily grant max stamina to deliver a brutal blow. Blocking worked similarly when blocking an incoming blow at the right moment. Fighting became a harmony. Utilizing your entire moveset felt natural. The tides could turn at any moment with a well-placed punch. Rising to the ranks in Legacy mode saw players gaining popularity as they managed fights, recovery, and schedules through their multiple weight classes. Rivalries could be had, or legends could be made. The online World Championship gave gamers the ability to compete against each other to dub themselves champion of the world. The engine upgrade and gameplay improvements did come with its faults, however. Creative Boxer mode used templates, but did allow for uploading your photo in the game or downloading boxers. Boxer likeness was accurate, but gave off a more cartoony vibe. Suffice it to say, EA still managed to release 4 successful titles in a row. Round 4 is considered one of, if not the greatest boxing game to date, not considering how eSports Boxing Club turns out at the time of this recording. In line with EA's tradition of evolving the series in its sequels, EA would return 2 years later, but this time, it was the final round. The medium of video games was certainly changing for the better. Franchises were maturing and replicating the nature of cinema. Set pieces enthralled audiences, and multiplayer prolonged franchises that otherwise would be left in the bargain bin. Expectations from investors and gamers were at an all-time high, so EA took it upon themselves to innovate Fight Night by adding in a feature that today may have been the final blow in putting the series to rest. Dubbed Fight Night Champion, EA Vancouver, previously known as EA Canada, made its first foray into the series in 2011, but this time, the game introduced a story. Like many boxing movies, the story featured a plethora of tropes such as a crooked promoter, a villainous foe, a backstory rooted in betrayal, hope, and inspiration. Regardless of EA's attempt at delivering a game that went beyond mindless fun, critical reception of the story was subpar. It's hard to imagine what game could have been developed had EA focused on the gameplay instead of spending development time on a mediocre story. Even so, the gameplay was slightly improved upon by updating the visuals, mechanics, and increasing the roster. New scans gave boxers a more grounded look, and filters added more variety to the aesthetic of the game. Punching animations were overhauled to add more velocity and realism to the movement. However, some features were omitted, such as Cutman minigames, the blocking meter, and player-controlled directional blocking. Cutman minigames were essentially removed, and recovery was simulated based on performance. The blocking meter was non-existent, and holding the block button enabled your boxer to automatically block high and low without any effort. This led to matches being a waiting game as players constantly held their guard and took turns punching. The simulated blocking was designed to be reflex-based, where your timing would work in unison with the boxer. Besides the spammy nature of blocking and the lack of minigames, the fighting is without a doubt just as, if not more brutal than round 4. Knockouts still, however, use canned animations, so there is a slight repetition in KOs. Total Punch Control went on to be renamed Full Spectrum Punch Control. Many of the punches remained the same, but flick-style punches were introduced to add more ease in connecting combos, while the Haymaker was substituted for a power modifier. All in all, Fight Night Champion is a feat in its own right. The cherry on top is Fight Night Champion is backwards compatible on the Series X and S and Xbox One family of consoles, even receiving a soft re-release for the Xbox One physically. Overall, the game rated in the range of 8s and 9s across the board. Being the corporate giant that EA is though, and having the reputation of killing off studios that didn't meet sales expectations, EA wasn't satisfied with the meager sales of Champion. Although selling around 2 million copies, Fight Night would hang up their gloves as EA transitioned its focus on developing UFC games to avoid the complications and costliness of licensing boxers. It would become the last Fight Night game to date, and the era of boxing games went into retirement for the next decade, until a rising star would reawaken the sport and take a shot at the title. But let me know what y'all think, man. That took me a while to make because I did not anticipate this taking as long as it did. It's my first, I would say, documentary style video. But let me know what y'all think of the Fight Night series, man. It's been fun playing the entire series of boxing games from EA, even though some of the earlier titles are so barbaric and outdated that it was kind of hard. It was kind of hard to play, even though I got my ass kicked most of the time. But let me know what y'all think, man. Slap that like button, hit subscribe because it helps out a lot. And I appreciate it very much, man. But in the meantime, have a beautiful day and a wonderful night, man. Peace.